It's 2025. 4 months. Whispers have circulated among Jehovah's Witnesses online. Quiet discussions about new light, decisive changes, and a spiritual turning point. Some saw hints in recent Watchtower articles, phrases like a sudden, decisive change, or a clearer understanding yet to come. They linked these to general, but high-profile, pronouncements about the nearness of the end. The online communities, unofficial but highly influential, had marked this year as a potential inflection point. The unspoken deadline. Others noticed the silence. No major announcements. No clarifications. No defense against the growing online anticipation. Just the same waiting, again. This silence, for the veteran witness, is often more telling than any announcement. It carries the weight of history, the echo of promises made and quietly withdrawn, of expectations raised and gently deflated. But history remembers patterns. And those who study the movements of faith understand that disappointment is not an ending but a transformation, a metamorphosis of belief under pressure. 1914, 1925, 1975. Each one began with confident, sometimes feverish, expectation, and ended with the quiet, crushing weight of disappointment. Each date was preceded by intense preparation, by sacrifices made, by lives restructured around the promise of imminent divine intervention. And each date passed into history, leaving behind not ruins but reinterpretations, not failures but refinements of understanding. And now, as 2025 fades into history, another silent chapter closes. Unspoken, but deeply felt. The faith of millions was not shaken, but tested. The quiet disappointment settles like dust after a storm, invisible but pervasive, affecting everything it touches. The question is, what comes next? How does an organization built on urgency and timeline react when the clock refuses to move? How does a religion founded on the promise of imminent change adapt when change refuses to come? The answer lies not in admission, but in adaptation. Not in apology, but in evolution. The Watchtower has survived for over a century not by being right, but by being resilient. Not by fulfilling prophecy, but by rewriting it. The prophetic precedent. When dates become lessons. The Watchtower's story has always been anchored by time. Its very foundation, laid by Charles Taze Russell in the late 19th century, was a meticulous calculation of Bible prophecy, a calculation that pointed initially to 1914 as the year when all earthly kingdoms would be destroyed and God's kingdom would be established on earth. Russell was not alone in his chronological obsession. The 19th century was an era of prophetic fever, of mathematical interpretations of biblical texts, of Christians across denominations attempting to decode the divine timetable. But Russell was particularly systematic, particularly confident, and particularly influential. His followers numbered in the tens of thousands, all awaiting the transformation of 1914 with absolute certainty. When that didn't happen, when the world continued largely unchanged except for the outbreak of a terrible war, the prophecy didn't fail. It evolved. 1914 became Christ's invisible enthronement in heaven, the beginning of his invisible presence, the start of the last days. The date didn't fail. Its understanding was simply refined. This became the template, the pattern that would repeat throughout the organization's history. Then came 1925, an era spearheaded by Joseph Rutherford, Russell's successor and a man of very different temperament. Where Russell was contemplative, Rutherford was combative. Where Russell built bridges, Rutherford burned them. And where Russell had focused on invisible heavenly events, Rutherford made a very visible, very tangible prediction. The expectation was literal and specific. The resurrection of the ancient princes, the faithful men of old like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They would return to earth in 1925 to lead God's people into a new era. Followers prepared with intense devotion. Rutherford himself had an elaborate house built in San Diego, California, a mansion called Beth Sarim, meaning House of the Princes, specifically to accommodate these resurrected patriarchs. When the date passed and no ancient princes appeared, when Beth Sarim remained conspicuously empty of Bronze Age patriarchs, the explanation came slowly. It was based on human misinterpretation, they said. An overeagerness to see God's promises fulfilled. A lesson in humility, not error. The house would eventually be sold quietly, a monument to misplaced certainty. But the defining moment, the one that still shapes the consciousness of older witnesses, was 1975. This was the modern era, the age of global communication and mass media. Thousands sold their homes, quit their jobs, withdrew their children from universities, plunged into full-time service, believing Armageddon was absolutely imminent, tied to a detailed calculation that marked 1975 as the 6,000th year of human existence, the completion of mankind's symbolic week of labor before God's millennial Sabbath rest. The anticipation was palpable, the preparation was total, and the disappointment was devastating. Unlike previous dates, 1975 couldn't be easily reinterpreted as invisible or symbolic. It was supposed to be the visible, dramatic end of the world system. When it passed, thousands left the organization. Others stayed, but with diminished faith, carrying the wound of betrayal. The postmortem for 1975 was slow and damaging. It wasn't until 1980 that a Watchtower article essentially admitted, quote, "We were the ones who became overly zealous." It turned into a painful lesson in patience, a costly education in the dangers of date-setting. Or so they said. And now 2025 follows the same rhythm. It was not an official date, not proclaimed from the platform with the confidence of 1975. But it was an emotional deadline, quietly built through phrases, publications, and the sustained anticipation surrounding the dwindling anointed class, those who claim to be heaven-bound and whose numbers have paradoxically increased rather than decreased as expected. The trigger was subtle. A Watchtower article, perhaps mentioned in late 2024 or early 2025, titled Questions from Readers, with phrases like a sudden, decisive change, or references to new understanding. To outsiders, it sounded harmless, vague even. To insiders, steeped in the coded language of Watchtower publications, it sounded like prophecy, a subtle nod to the imminent, dramatic shift they had been waiting for. But now, as the year closes, the silence that has followed has become its own predictable message. The organization must now employ its well-established mechanism for survival, the doctrinal pivot. Rethinking the end. From dates to duration. After 2025, the organization faces a familiar dilemma. How to maintain a sense of urgency without setting any more identifiable clocks. How to keep the faithful in a state of spiritual readiness without giving them specific dates that can fail, specific expectations that can be disappointed. The primary goal is to defuse the timeline without appearing to abandon the core prophecy. The next doctrinal adjustment will likely dissolve time altogether, making the focus on duration rather than dates, on spiritual readiness rather than calendrical calculation. The overlapping generations doctrine, already a convoluted, deeply confusing concept designed to extend the relevance of 1914, is the most likely victim. Introduced gradually over several years, it proposed that the generation that would see the end includes not just those who witnessed 1914, but also those who overlapped with them, creating an elastic timeline that could stretch decades beyond what the original "this generation will not pass away" teaching allowed. It won't be explicitly revoked. The Watchtower rarely explicitly revokes major doctrines. Instead, it will simply fade. It will disappear from public talks, be relegated to historical footnotes in publications, quietly dropped from the training curriculum. It will become a forgotten doctrine, too complex to serve the goal of simple, urgent preaching. Within 5 years, new witnesses won't even know it existed. In its place, expect a return to vaguer, highly emotional language. Phrases like, "we are deep in the time of the end," or "closer than ever before," will replace any language tied to specific temporal measuring sticks. These phrases are unfalsifiable, eternally flexible, capable of meaning everything and nothing simultaneously. Biblical timelines, particularly those involving Matthew chapter 24 and the book of Daniel chapter 12, will be reframed entirely. They will no longer be seen as literal countdowns or a precise sequence of events that can be mapped onto human history. Instead, they will be taught as ongoing spiritual periods, symbolic representations of the spiritual warfare between God's organization and Satan's world system. This pivot is brilliant in its simplicity. It transforms prophecy from a scientific calculation, something that can be proven or disproven, into a spiritual condition, something that is experienced and felt. By the end of 2026, the narrative shift will be complete. The message will move from "Armageddon is near, so sell your house and pioneer," to "we must stay ready, we must endure, however long it takes. Our faith is the evidence of the end's nearness." This places the burden of proof squarely on the individual witness's level of activity, not on the organization's prophetic track record. If you feel the urgency, if you live with spiritual vigilance, then the end is near for you. Your experience becomes the validation of the prophecy. It's no longer about external events matching predictions. It's about internal devotion demonstrating faith. Organizational overhaul. Restructuring the message. The Watchtower has always evolved after disappointment, not by admitting failure, but by changing the subject, redirecting the energy, and refocusing the collective mind. This is a masterclass in institutional deflection, a demonstration of organizational survival instincts honed over more than a century. Here's what will likely come next, targeting the internal life of the witness community. First, the 2026 Memorial Talk. The memorial, celebrated annually on the date corresponding to the Jewish Passover, is the highest profile event of the witness calendar. More people attend the memorial than any other meeting, including inactive members and interested persons. The 2026 Memorial Talk will almost certainly avoid eschatology altogether. No deep dives on the Great Tribulation. No detailed explanations of the resurrection hope. Instead, it will center on loyalty, endurance, and personal devotion. The focus will be on the example of Jesus' love, his sacrifice, his perfect obedience to his Father. The message will be, follow his example of patience, of trust in divine timing, of unwavering commitment even when circumstances seem delayed or unclear. It will be a masterpiece of redirection, taking the congregation's mind off unfulfilled prophecy and placing it on imitable virtue. Second, the pioneering system. The call to pioneer, to engage in full-time ministry, has always been framed as an urgent necessity tied to the short time remaining. If the end is near, the logic goes, then every moment must be devoted to the life-saving work of preaching. But this framing creates a problem when the end doesn't come. This may shift. Emphasis may move away from raw hours and door-knocking quotas to internal education and retention. The goal will be to slow the outward flow of disillusioned members, prioritizing the depth of faith in the existing member base over the breadth of conversion. Quality over frantic quantity. Expect new programs focused on family worship, on deepening biblical understanding, on mentoring and discipleship within congregations. The metric of success will change from how many people did you preach to how strong is your faith, how united is your family, how committed are you to the organization. Third, the JW broadcasting surge. The organization's video platform has become its most powerful tool for emotional reinforcement and doctrinal distribution. Expect a near-constant flow of new, emotionally reinforcing content. The themes will be gratitude, unity, and endurance in uncertain times. Emotional testimonials will replace doctrinal studies. Stories of families who stayed faithful through hardship. Interviews with longtime witnesses who have seen decades pass but never lost their faith. Musical performances that stir emotion rather than explain theology. The organization knows what silence and doubt can do. It fills the void with repetitive, comforting, and highly produced emotional reinforcement. The medium becomes the message. Unity, positivity, unwavering loyalty. By the end of 2026, the urgency narrative may be replaced with a slower, more deliberate, and more pastoral tone. The message will be, remain steadfast. Jehovah's timing is perfect. Do not look to man's timelines. Do not lean on your own understanding. Trust in the faithful and discreet slave who are patiently waiting alongside you. History shows a clear pattern. After each major disappointment, organizational control tightens. The collective shock of the unfulfilled prophecy is transformed into a test of the individual's commitment to the leadership. Disappointment becomes not evidence of organizational error, but proof of individual faith or lack thereof. The first step will be internal. Congregations may receive new, sharp reminders in talks and study articles about not speculating about dates. This shifts the blame away from the source of the prophetic phrases and onto the members who gave them too much thought. The leadership didn't fail. The members misunderstood. The leadership didn't overpromise. The members expected too much. Dissenters and questioners will be quietly counseled by elders in private meetings. The concept of apostasy, challenging or questioning the governing body, will again become a prominent theme in talks and publications. The message will be clear and unambiguous. Doubt is a spiritual disease, a cancer that must be excised before it spreads. The governing body will emphasize unity as divine proof of their anointing, framing any doubt or internal questioning as satanic influence, an attempt to sow discord in Jehovah's peaceful arrangement. The logic is circular but effective. The organization is God's because we are unified. We are unified because we follow the organization. Therefore, questioning the organization breaks the unity that proves it's from God. Meanwhile, former members and questioning witnesses who use the 2025 disappointment to voice their concerns will face intensified shunning rhetoric. The narrative will be solidified. Those who left failed the test of faith. They lacked the endurance to await Jehovah's perfect timing. They allowed pride and independent thinking to separate them from God's people. They are examples of spiritual weakness, cautionary tales to be referenced in parts and talks. In 2026, expect a subtle but coordinated psychological pivot, transforming the organizational disappointment into proof of the individual's loyalty to the faithful slave. It's no longer about whether the prophecy was accurate. It's about whether you remained loyal when things seemed unclear. Loyalty becomes the new metric, the new test, the new proof of faith. The aftermath. The 2026 narrative begins. As 2025 closes without fulfillment, the organization must rewrite the year in real time. This is their most important narrative of the next decade, and it must be crafted carefully, delivered consistently, and reinforced relentlessly. Here's how it will likely sound from the Kingdom Hall platform. Imagine an elder, experienced and confident, addressing the congregation during a service meeting. Brothers and sisters, as we reflect on this past year, we must ask ourselves, what has Jehovah been teaching us? He never told us a date. The faithful slave never promised us a specific year. But Jehovah used this year to test our faith, to refine our endurance, to strengthen our loyalty. Satan tried to exploit our hope to create discord among us, to make us doubt the faithful slave, to weaken our resolve. But we have remained unified. We have remained faithful. And that unity, that faithfulness, is evidence of Jehovah's blessing on his organization. By mid-2026, a Watchtower study article might introduce a new, memorable phrase like the age of testing or Jehovah's refining period. These phrases will be repeated in talks, referenced in broadcasts, incorporated into prayers. They will become the lens through which 2025 is remembered. Not as a year of unfulfilled expectation, but as a year of spiritual refinement. JW Broadcasting will feature highly emotional testimonials from members saying how they grew spiritually in 2025 despite worldly expectations, or learned to trust Jehovah more completely when things didn't happen as we thought they might. These testimonials will be carefully selected, expertly edited, and powerfully presented to create a narrative of triumph rather than disappointment. Statistical reports may show declining hours in field service, fewer baptisms, perhaps even negative growth in some regions. But these will be reframed as quality over quantity, as the result of deepening personal study rather than shallow door-to-door work, as evidence that the organization is maturing, becoming more substantial, more rooted. The Watchtower will not call 2025 a failure. It cannot, because to do so would be to admit fallibility, to acknowledge that the faithful slave can mislead, however unintentionally. Instead, it will call it a transition, a turning point, a year of unexpected blessings. It will call it the year of refinement. Disappointment is not the end of faith. For many religious movements, it's the engine that keeps faith alive, the test that proves devotion, the fire that refines belief into something harder, more resilient, more resistant to doubt. The Jehovah's Witnesses are not the first group to build hope on a prophetic timeline, and they won't be the last. Religious history is littered with unfulfilled prophecies, with dates that passed silently, with expectations that dissolved into reinterpretation. The Millwrights became the Seventh-day Adventists. The Shakers believed the end was in their lifetime. Countless movements have survived by transforming disappointment into deeper commitment. But what makes the witness story unique is how the timeline itself becomes the test. Each generation inherits both the promise and the delay, learning to wait, to believe, and to adjust. The leadership moves the goalposts. The rank and file move their lives. Children grow up in households where the end is always imminent but never arrives. Adults spend decades in a state of suspended urgency, always ready, always waiting, always believing that this might be the year. And in 2026, as new understandings emerge, as doctrines are quietly revised, As narratives are carefully reconstructed, the cycle begins again. Refined, reworded, and remarkably resilient. The prophecy doesn't die. It simply learns to survive. It adapts, evolves, and continues, carried forward by millions who have invested too much to walk away, who have built their entire lives around these beliefs, who find meaning in community and purpose in the waiting itself. The faith, in its own way, is never broken. It bends, but does not shatter. It adjusts, but does not abandon. And perhaps that is the most remarkable prophecy of all. Not that the end will come, but that the belief in the end will endure, generation after generation, disappointment after disappointment, forever waiting, forever faithful, forever just on the edge of the promised transformation that always remains just out of reach.